Life history of Niels Peter Ipson, Niels Peterson Ipson, complied by Bertha Seaman Stromberg, contributed by W. Walter Helen 1. Far to the cold north, on an island in the Baltic Sea, on March 16, 1833, there was born a son to Jeppe Morgensen Ipson and Ellen Margrethe Nielsen. His birthplace was Svaneke, Bornholm, Denmark, and 9 days later, he was christened Niels Peterson Ipson. Later on, when he was to live in America, he changed his name to Niels Peter Ipson. As such, he has since been known. Niels was the seventh and youngest child to be born to his father, Jeppe Morgensen, who was born in 1799 in Ibsker, Bornholm, Denmark, and to his mother, Ellen Margrethe Nielsen, who was born in 1795 in Ostermary, Bornholm, Denmark. Niels' parents' first children were twins, born August 15, 1823 in Svaneke. Niels Christian lived 10 hours, and a daughter was stillborn. All the other children lived to maturity. They were Hans, born September 15, 1824, Elsie Margrethe, born November 30, 1826, Christian Mogensen, born November 10, 1828, and Elisa Margrethe, born October 16, 1930. Bornholm is a small rocky island, and Niels' forefathers for generations had lived upon this island. They were a rugged and hardy class of people, descended from the sturdy Norse stock, who ruled the sea from the middle of the 8th to the 13th century, and who, according to historians, visited the American shores hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus did. Their living consisted chiefly from farming and fishing. Niels' parents were poor, and when the farm work was over, his father would go to sea on fishing trips, thereby making sufficient to maintain his family. As the boys grew old enough, they would accompany their father, and as a result, Niels learned to be an expert fisherman. However, as the boys became older, each in turn learned some kind of trade to help sustain themselves. In March 1849, when Niels was 15 years old, he went to Copenhagen and learned the trade of shoemaker. He served as an apprentice for 5 years, working for his board and lodging. While in Copenhagen in 1854, he began working as a journeyman, which he continued to do until June 1855. During the time that Niels lived in Copenhagen, he also learned the message of the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, taught by the Mormon missionaries. Niels and his forebears were a devout and God-fearing people who belonged to the Lutheran Church. They had been imbued with the spirit of Martin Luther, that a man had the right to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience, so it was not hard for Niels to accept baptism in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. His baptism took place September 30, 1854, Elder Birch being the baptizing elder. Another important event which took place during Niels' sojourn in Copenhagen was the acquaintance he made with Georgine Maria Keller, Kjaller. Georgina Maria, also a member of the Mormon Church, was baptized May 23, 1853. It seems logical that Niels and Georgine might possibly have met, for the first time, at a meeting of the Latter-day Saints Church. Georgine Maria Keller was born March 18, 1828 in Run, Bornholm, Denmark. She was the daughter of Hans Mortensen Kjaller and Sophia Elizabeth Robo. Niels and Georgine were married in Copenhagen on November 19, 1854. They were very desirous to emigrate to Utah. The Danish king had made an agreement with Germany to furnish soldiers for foreign wars. All able-bodied men, between the ages of 18 and 45, were being drafted for this purpose. Because of Niels' deep desire to gather with the saints in Zion, and because of his dislike of war, he conferred with the president of the Danish mission, John Van Cott, about the advisability of leaving Denmark. The president advised him to go to Hull, England, there to await the sailing of an emigrant ship. This Niels did in June 1855, leaving his bride behind. He would have to secure work in England and send for her. In England, Niels worked at his trade of shoemaker and quickly acquired some knowledge of the English language. He enjoyed himself very much associating with the saints in the vicinity. He sent money to Denmark so that his wife was able to join him, and on March 18, 1856, they traveled to Liverpool, where they stayed until the 23rd, at which time they embarked on the ship Enoch train and set sail for America. James Ferguson was in charge of the 534 saints during the voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. On April 28th, after a voyage of 4 stormy weeks, they arrived safely in the Boston harbor. From Boston, they traveled by emigrant train to Iowa City, Iowa. Here they remained for 5 weeks, awaiting the delivery of their handcarts, with which they were to travel overland to the valley of the Great Salt Lake. Iowa City, Johnson County, Iowa was the outfitting place for the saints who crossed the plains in 1856 to 57 and 58. The arrival of so many saints in 1856 made Iowa City a place of importance. Here the handcarts were manufactured and outfits purchased also for those who crossed with mules, horses, and oxen. 5 handcart companies and several wagon companies of Latter-day Saints left Iowa City in 1856 for the Rocky Mountains. During the wait and rest in Iowa City, Niels secured work in fields, helping the local farmers. With his wages, he was able to pay for his handcart and partially equip it with the necessary items for the long journey westward. Sufficiently equipped, the saints traveled on to Florence, Nebraska. On June 11, 1856, the start was made. West of Florence was over 1,000 miles of vast wilderness, unfolding many trials, hardships, and heartaches, but day after day, the weary company pressed on. Their religion, the motive for their wearisome journey, was dearer than life itself to them. The unknown future held no perils, for they had placed themselves in God's care. Each night Niels and Georgine knelt in secret prayer and thanked God for their safekeeping and asked that He might still give them strength to carry on. This company of saints later became known as the Second Hardcart Company. It crossed the plains under the leadership of Captain Daniel D. MacArthur. They started from Florence after the first handcart company led by Captain Edmund Ellsworth. Like the first company, the second company was composed largely of emigrants who had crossed the Atlantic Ocean from Liverpool, England, leaving March 23, 1856. It consisted of 222 souls, 48 handcarts for wagons, 12 yoke of oxen, and 12 cows. The handcart companies endured many hardships and much suffered during their journey. They traveled amid boiling sun, scorching winds, torrential rains, and the waded swollen streams and rivers. They encountered large herds of buffalo, were in constant fear of Indian attacks, and the latter part of the journey, they encountered snow. A number of the companies starved to death before its arrival in Utah. They were able to have only half rations of food, and they had to walk 1,300 miles pulling their heavy oak and hickory carts carrying all their bedding, clothing, food, and treasures. Niels said in his writings, then took place that memorable handcart trip to Salt Lake City, Utah. We arrived, after enduring many hardships, privations, starvations, thirst, and sickness. Pulling our own handcarts for 9 weeks, we arrived in the valley September 26, 1856, with scarcely enough life left in us to hold together. Here, we remained in a very feeble and weakened condition all winter, food and clothing being very scarce. They had to dispose of all their surplus belongings before leaving Iowa City, so their carts would not be overloaded. 7 of the company died en route. The companies were met by Brigham Young and a brass band, after having accomplished a fate which human wisdom said could not be done. The saints in Salt Lake City were kind to them, furnishing them scantily with extra bedding and clothes, but the people in Utah were at the time passing through what since has been known as the hard winter. The grasshoppers had destroyed the crops, and the intense cold was killing the cattle by the hundreds. Many of the saints were compelled to live on bran bread and carcasses of cattle in order to save themselves from starvation. Niels wrote that he and Georgine reminded all winter in a very feeble and weakened condition, food and clothing both being very scarce, and that they suffered greatly from exposure. However, Niels began working at his trade and was paid in vegetables and other eatable things. They lived mostly on roots. There was no flour and they seldom had even a soup bone. The summer of 1857 brought better conditions, as crops did fairly well and Niels had plenty of work. He bought some property on State Street, on which there was a small cabin, and he began to accumulate some necessities around him. In his own words, "So we lived very comfortable. Our happiness was very short-lived, for the coming of Johnson's army made many sad hearts and cast much gloom over the saints." Niels was called to serve as a soldier in Echo Canyon, under Captain Wells. Niels was unaccustomed to the life of a soldier and the use of firearms. He had a great dislike for war and fighting of any kind. After several weeks, Captain Wells decided the soldiers needed shoes perhaps more than Niels' services were required as a soldier, so he requested that Niels return to Salt Lake to repair and make shoes for the soldiers. In his own works, he said, "I enjoyed this change very much." Soon, President Brigham Young advised him along with other saints to leave Salt Lake City and move south, in the preparation of vacating and destroying the city before Johnson's army arrived. In this move, he and Georgine went as far as Manti, Sanpete County, Utah. Here they acquired property, and Niels worked at his trade of shoemaker and did farming. He also served many long and tedious hours as a minute man against the raging Indians. Niels lived in Manti approximately 10 years. During this time, 7 children were born, 5 to Georgine, George, Sophia, Sarah, Annie Maria, and Mary, and 1 child born to his second wife, Inger Lena, Peter, and 1 to his third wife, Inger Kirstein. Sophia died the same day she was born. While Annie Maria was an infant, an Indian sneaked into the house one day while her mother was doing chores outside. He took Annie Maria and started to run. Her mother looked up from her duties just in time to see what was happening. She screamed to the top of her voice for help. Men left their work in the near field, the Indian was pursued, and the baby recovered. On November 11th, 1859, Niels and Georgine traveled to Salt Lake City to the endowment house, where they received their endowments and were sealed for time and all eternity. Niels believed all the principles of the gospel and tried earnestly to live them. Polygamy was, as we know, being practiced by the church at this time. Niels took a second wife, Inger Lena Pearson Johnson. Little is known of her. She was a widow who came from Sweden. The story is told that a lone woman had to have promise of marriage in this country before being allowed to emigrate here. Niels promised to take her as his wife upon her arrival, which he did. He met her in Salt Lake City, and they were married in the endowment house September 19, 1861. Inger Lena had 3 small sons when she started from Sweden. They all died during the voyage across the ocean and were buried at sea. After their marriage, Niels took his second wife to Manti, where he helped her to set up housekeeping in separate quarters, away from where his first wife resided. To this marriage was born 1 son, Peter. Niels's first wife, Georgine, was a midwife. She had been graduated from the Copenhagen Medical College with a degree in obstetrics. She practiced for 9 years while living in Manti. Inasmuch as she was called away from home frequently in the service of others, help was needed in the home to care for the young family. Inger Kirstein Madsen, a young girl who had been converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in her native land of Denmark, was hired to work in the home of Niels and Georgine. After some time, she also married Niels as his third wife. He brought her to Salt Lake City, where they were married October 10, 1864, in the endowment house. President Brigham Young performed the ceremony. They returned to Manti, where Inger Kirstein was my grandmother, continued to keep house and care for the children, while Georgine spent her time caring for the sick and also helped in supplementing the family income. Inger Kirstein was born April 3, 1849 in Ronners, Randers County, Denmark. Her father, Niels Madsen, was born August 2nd, 1798, and her mother, Mette Maria Christensen, was born September 13th, 1815. They both joined the church in Denmark and emigrated to America and Utah in 1863, coming on the sailing vessel V.S. Kimball to New York City and thence to Utah. Inger Kirstein's first child, Kirstein, was born in Manti, December 25, 1865. This daughter lived only 4 days. It was fall of 1866 that Niels was called by the authorities of the church to journey to St. Thomas, Nevada, to assist in what was called the Muddy Mission, it being at the time supposedly a part of Utah. He at once proceeded to dispose of everything at Manti, with the exception of things which were a necessity and could be transported by ox train. Niels took with his first wife, Georgine, and her children, and his third wife, Inger Kirstein, who was carrying another child during this journey. Mette Maria was born in St. Thomas January 31st, 1867, and died in May the same year. Here, also, was born to Georgine her 2 youngest children, Niels Peter Jr. and Dorothy Elizabeth. For the 5 years spent in St. Thomas, Georgine continued to practice obstetrics, while Inger Kirstein took care of the household duties and the children. 2 more children were born to her during this time. John, born September 28, 1868, died in July the following year, and James Lorenzo, born June 12, 1870. James Lorenzo was her 4th child and the first one to survive past infancy. Niels' second wife, Inger Lena, and her son did not go with Niels to the Muddy Mission, but remained in Manti. In St. Thomas, Niels, with other colonists, struggled to make homes and raise food in the parched and fruitless desert. They were sent there principally to raise cotton. The cotton was taken from the Muddy to Washington factory where they obtained cloth for it. Handicapped not only by nature, but by lack of equipment, they toiled on. What grains were raised had to be tramped out by horses' feet and left to be cleaned of chaff by the winds. For 5 years they toiled and suffered to subdue the alkali soil. The land was sandy, and the Virgin River carried so much sand, it was a constant effort to keep the water in the canal. The condition of the settlers was described as something like destitution. Many were nearly naked for want of clothing. They could sell nothing to obtain money, and cotton and cloth did not answer all the purposes. Soon the United States government made a survey and established the fact that St. Thomas was part of Nevada. Nevada forced upon the settlers the payment of taxes for 5 years back. President Brigham Young was a visitor to the Muddy settlements in March 1870. He saw what a hard fight the settlers were having, conditions being unfavorable for agriculture or making homes. There was such excessive heat and wind, and the people could not raise money for the back taxes they owed the state of Nevada. He advised the settlers to return to Utah. On December 20th, 1870, a meeting was called, and the people of the Muddy met with Joseph W. Young, stake president of the southern settlements. The people resolved to abandon the location and look for new homes. As the result, Niels with nearly 200 others of the Muddy started to move back to Utah. Nearly all left early in the year 1871. They left their homes, orchards, farms, and canals to whoever might come to possess them. Their fall wheat growing green in the fields, estimated at 8,000 bushels, was left to be harvested by one individual who failed to comply with the decision and who later tore down most of the homes. Niels took his families to Glendale, Kane County, Utah. The exodus from St. Thomas to Glendale took 1 month. Niels stayed in Glendale for only a few months, from spring to fall in 1871. From Glendale, they moved to Panguitch, Garfield County, Utah. Garfield County was at the time actually still a part of Iron County. The division was made March 9, 1882. The remainder of Niels Peter Ipson's life was spent in Panguitch at the Panguitch Lake. He had a home and farming land in Panguitch. He homesteaded 160 acres of ranch land on the north side of Panguitch Lake, on which he raised cattle. A few years later, 3 of his sons bought adjoining property, which had been homesteaded by a Mr. Reynolds. The family worked the 320 acres together, which was considerable ranch property for those days. Panguitch Lake is situated 8 miles south of Panguitch on a county road. Much of the area around the lake was homesteaded in 1873 to 74. Niels Peter built a cabin or a dugout, which was the first place built at the lake. He and Inger Karestein spent 40 summers at the lake. The canyon behind their property became known as Ipson Canyon, and its stream of water Ipson caught fish, not only for his family's use, but for many other families in Panguitch. His wife, Inger Karestein, would pack the fish in barrels with salt, and many were sold and shipped to surrounding territories. During the days of the Silver Reef mining boom, he supplied the mining people with fish. Great loads of fish were taken from Panguitch Lake. The lake was well named, as Panguitch is an Indian word meaning big fish. Niels Peter bought a small sailboat. It was the only one on the lake, and when the wind was favorable on holidays, he would take his family sailing. They were a close-knit family and had great fun together. He was a great friend to the Indians and would sometimes take some of them sailing. A year or so after Niels Peter moved his families to Panguitch, his first wife, Georgine, left with her children and moved to Beaver County, Utah. No one seems to know exactly the reason why, but the most logical story, which has been handed down through the years, is that she was able to make a good living practicing midwifery and felt that she could give her children better advantages by making her way alone. If she stayed, she felt necessitated to pool her earnings with that of her husband. Inger Karestein was a much younger woman and capable of bearing more children. In order to live polygamy, it takes those of extra strong character, of great integrity, unselfishness, patience, understanding, love deep and abiding faith in God, a lasting desire to live the law of plural marriage, and a strong determination to succeed. Inger Karestein bore 9 more children, all of them in Panguitch, with the exception of one, Erastus, born at Panguitch Lake June 10, 1881. He lived only 9 days. The other children were Niels Christian, Margaret Elizabeth, Hans Peter, Joseph, Hiram, Lena, my mother, Parley, and Lawrence. Niels Peter's and Georgine's oldest son, George, decided to remain with his father in Panguitch. Sometime after Georgine moved to Beaver, she secured a divorce from Niels Peter. I would suppose for legal purposes, as the families always remained good friends and did visiting back and forth. Many of Georgine's grandchildren tell of the summer trips to Panguitch Lake to visit their grandfather, the good times they had fishing and boating, and the excellent meals, hospitality, and congeniality they enjoyed while there. The Ipson Ranch, situated in Ipson Canyon at Panguitch Lake, was always a welcome and hospitable refuge for travelers and visitors. The family of Niels Peter and Inger Karestein have often remarked that it seemed they always had company at the ranch. Niels Peter enjoyed company and was always happy to see them come. He was quick to make them feel at home. Often he said to his visitors, as they took their leave, "You have made me glad twice. Glad to see you come and glad to see you leave." He enjoyed a good joke and had many amusing and interesting experiences to relate. He entertained many church authorities in his home and felt that he was always blessed for doing so. He loved to visit with and get new and stimulating thoughts from them. What he lacked in formal education, he endeavored to search out by reading and study. He subscribed to the church magazines and the Deseret News. He was always overjoyed at their arrival and would read and reread them, teaching his children to do likewise, encouraging his family to learn everything they possibly could. He insisted that they make the most of school opportunities, studying to their utmost. He instilled in his children a great hunger for knowledge and education, and helped financially to educate as many as he was able. I am sure today that he would be very happy and proud with the accomplishments of many of his descendants. Niels Peter was a very thrifty man, believing that waste makes want. He had known poverty as a boy in Denmark. After he had accepted the restored gospel and made his way to America, he felt his circumstances to be so greatly improved and was very appreciative of his blessings. He always attended church services and never missed bearing his testimony each month, in which he gave thanks to the Lord for his abundant life in the land of the free. He never spoke the Danish language within hearing of his children, as he wanted them to be truly Americans. He was a very methodical and exacting person. One time he fell into the lake as he was taking his anchor in. Other fishermen came to his rescue, and he said, "Don't get excited and let's cooperate in this matter. I can swim and keep up a little longer." Then he explained to the boys how to hold the boat. When they had righted it, he climbed in and came to shore. He believed that no man is too good to work for his living. He was an excellent provider and always saw that his family was well fed and clothed. He did not like any of his children to go barefooted, as he felt that the least a shoemaker could do was to keep his family in shoes. He thought that anything worth doing at all was worth doing well. This teaching carried over in my mother's life so vividly that she instilled it in me, and though many years have elapsed since her death, I can still hear her saying it. He hated war and strife, and always prayed that the angel of peace might dwell with his family and all people. Records show that Niels Peter Ipson spent many hours in the temple doing work for his dead progenitors and their families. He died in Panguitch January 20th, 1910 at the age of 76. He died, as he lived, firm in the faith of the restored gospel. To enjoy these blessings, he suffered and toiled much, but always said it was worth the price. He was a kind and devoted husband and father, and a friend to all. He was buried in the Panguitch Cemetery January 23, 1910. Inscribed on the stove over his grave is, Niels Peter Ipson, March 16, 1833, January 20th, 1910, he being dead speaketh. Inasmuch as my grandfather Ipson passed from this earthly life before I came into it, it was not my privilege to know him, but I am grateful for the wonderful heritage that is mine, partially because of him. I am proud to be descendant of this worthy pioneer, whose courage, faith, endurance, and devotion were, from beginning to end, so vividly displayed in his life. I am thankful for his teachings, for his pioneer spirit, for his unwavering faith in the restored gospel, and in America the land of the free, and I am thankful for the way he helped instill in my mother the desire to be faithful and true, and to seek after that which was good. When I think of his life, I am reminded of Psalms, chapter 7 verses 17 and 18. O God, thou hast taught me from my youth, and hitherto have declared thy wondrous works. Now also when I am old and grey-headed, O God, forsake me not, until I have showed thy strength unto this generation, and thy power to everyone that is to come.